Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another event sponsored by the Charles Hutchins Institute for Racial Justice. My name is Charles Ogletree, and Ernest is telling me to take a microphone. It works. Good. This is a panel about the military, and we're expecting one other person to come. Enoch, I hope he makes it. He's going to be in the audience, and you'll see him. You'll know him. He'll have his hat on, World War II, things like that. So this is a great opportunity to learn a little about, and we've got the whole generations of people who can talk about our involvement in the military and what that's meant for African Americans in particular. So I'm going to turn this over to Howard Manley, who was the editor of all newspapers throughout America, and finally, for a while, was the editor of the Bay State Banner. And I have to say a couple of things about Howard. I mean, very inspirational in terms of his coverage of everything in Boston was very important. And one thing that I noticed that not only did he cover President Obama's run, but I think there's a front page picture about when Obama lost in New Hampshire. But you didn't count that. He lost. He lost in New Hampshire.
Not the way the banner told the story.
right. You told a different story, right? So be careful. But I'm very glad that he's here moderating this panel about the military. We've got some great people. You introduced them as well. They'll introduce themselves, and then we'll have a discussion. And I hope that you guys will have questions. And try to keep your questions brief. I know I'm usually talking to younger students, but I'm talking to everybody because we're going to try to get as many questions as possible. So please welcome this panel and Howard Manley.
All right. Thank you, Professor Ogletree. I got to tell you, I'm glad that the weather is breaking here in Boston, and you all decided to come here and listen to a story that rarely gets the attention or the play that I think it deserves. And that is the desegregation of the U.S. military. The more I have read about it, the more fascinating you get, and you never, and we're just talking amongst ourselves about, you never get to the bottom of it, just how deep it really is. Just the efforts of African Americans to fight in all the noble wars. And I'll say from the outset, we're not here to talk about whether the war was good or bad. Most people will understand that wars are generally awful. Especially those who have fought them. But we are here to talk about the history of this and where we are today. So on our panel, we have some distinguished people, and I'm a little starstruck by a couple of them. Chad Williams, professor over at Brandeis University. He just finished a book on, a couple of years ago, The Torchbearers of Democracy, where he details the desegregation of the U.S. military during the World War I years. That's a fascinating period, and it makes you almost think that you should have paid attention at European history when you were in high school. Vera Grant Ingram, did I miss that? Ingrid, all right, I'm already excited. She has done fascinating work on the image of African American soldiers during World War I, with a focus on the cultural view that Germans had, and she will talk a little bit more about specifically her work over the last decade, I just found out. So, and she has a nice PowerPoint presentation of a lot of images from that era. My friend, Ernie Washington, will shift gears from the World War I era to the Vietnam War. We have an excellent interview that he did with the military channel or some website, and he'll talk about sort of the race relations during the turbulent 60s in Vietnam and what that meant for him personally as a kid from Roxbury, 18 years old when you first. That was, 90 years ago? Well, Ernest is here to tell his story about Nam. Whenever you hear about Vietnam, you just go, ooh, that was bad, but Ernest's got a great story. And I'm really glad to meet, finally, Richard Ogletree, Professor Ogletree's brother, who's just retired as a Master Sergeant in the Air Force. He can sort of talk about where we are, sort of post-Colin Powell. It's almost assumed that blacks and whites are together in the military, So he can talk a little bit more about now. So I think we're going to span a lot of territory. So we'll have some introductory remarks, a couple of presentations, and then we'll throw it up for questions. And please feel free to ask as much as you want. These are the experts. I'm just a garage sort of guy. I'm backing off from all sort of statements. So,
being too modest.
So Professor Chad, if you could just start us off, please.
Sure. Thank you everyone for being here today. It's truly an honor and a privilege to participate in this discussion, and to especially have this discussion hosted by the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, especially given who Charles Hamilton Houston is and his connection to the history of African Americans in the military. Charles Hamilton Houston was an officer in World War I. And that experience was absolutely pivotal in shaping his social, political, and racial consciousness, paving the way for him to embark on what was a truly legendary career as a civil rights attorney. He wrote a serialized memoir in the Pittsburgh Courier in 1940, where he talked about his experience in World War I. In one section of this memoir, he wrote that the hate and scorn showered on us Negro officers by our fellow white Americans convinced me that there was no sense in my dying for a world ruled by them. I made up my mind that if I got back through this war, I would study law and use my time fighting for men who could not strike back. Right? And he used that experience, the disillusionment, the frustration of fighting in a war for democracy when democracy could not be enjoyed by himself personally, by African Americans more broadly, to channel that into fighting for civil rights in the arena of the law. In 1937, as the United States was debating a new Selective Service Act, he testified before Congress. In 1940, he testified before Congress. But 3 years before that, he wrote a letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt about the issue of racial discrimination in the military, and specifically desegregation. And he wrote that, "We pray that the Negro population will always remain loyal, but it will not again silently endure the insults and discrimination imposed on its soldiers in the course of the last war." Right? And he was also instrumental in what would eventually become the desegregation of the military in 1948. So I begin with Charles Hamilton Houston very appropriately, because in some ways he encapsulates the title of this discussion, The Right to Fight. Thinking about military service as a confirmation of African American citizenship, the right of African American citizens to fight and to even die on the behalf of their country. But I think the reality is more complex, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. You've given me a task of laying out a lot of history here, so I don't want to take too much time. I actually teach a class on African American military history, so I could go on and on. But I think that the right to fight is really quite evocative, and over the course of the long history of African Americans in the military has never been static, has never meant one singular thing. Just what African Americans have been fighting for, who they have been fighting for, has reflected the evolving nature of Black people's place in the country and their shifting identity in relation to both race as well as in relation to nation as well. So we can start with the American Revolution. The American Revolution, the right to fight was shaped by slavery and specifically the proximity of freedom during that war. 5,000 African Americans fought for the Patriot cause with the hopes of becoming part of the new nation as free people. But many other Black people, including thousands of enslaved peoples of African descent, chose to throw their lot with the British military, reasoning that this was their best possibility for freedom. And so we see in this earliest of wars how the themes of hope, the aspirations for freedom were embedded in the Black military experience, but also how those hopes and aspirations were not met, were not fulfilled, how the hopes for freedom for many Black people during the American Revolution were in fact denied. The expansion of slavery and the evolution of race in the aftermath of the American Revolution also went hand in hand with the incompatibility of black people as soldiers in the white imagination, right? The idea that black men could be soldiers, be effective soldiers, could bear arms, had the mental, constitutional capability to be soldiers was something that ran counter to the very ideas at the core of slavery. Black people had no nation to fight for, right? Moreover, I think soldiering in this context would have conferred both status and power to black men, again, undermining the very ideas of racial inferiority at the core of pro-slavery thought. Then came the Civil War, right? And I think the Civil War is absolutely critical in thinking about just what black military service has meant in terms of its status, in terms of its meanings for individual black soldiers, but also the symbolic dimensions of what black military service has represented. The Civil War forged a very powerful link between black military service, freedom, and African-American citizenship. Over 180,000 black troops served in the Union Army, revealed the symbolic potency of black military service and just this idea of the black soldier specifically. The black soldier, I think both in history as well as in the arena of representation, and Vera, you could probably talk more about this as well, in some ways has embodied this idea of a new Negro, right? And we could really think about how that has its roots in the Civil War and in the aftermath of the Civil War. For African Americans, this has entailed a new radical conception of black manhood and civic status as transformed by wearing the uniform. I think there's something very powerful about putting on the uniform of the American military and how that transforms how black men and women quite literally see themselves, but also how they're seen by African Americans as well as white Americans as well. In the context of the Civil War, this represented an incredibly powerful, visceral break from an antebellum slave past. Conversely, for white Southerners, the black soldier emerges as a problem, right? Emerges as a distinct problem, something to be managed, controlled, a threat to white supremacy. Right? And the contention in terms of race relations, racial violence, specifically surrounding black soldiers, I would argue really has its roots in the Civil War and in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. The Buffalo Soldiers, famous 24th and 25th and 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments, established shortly after the end of the Civil War, in one sense reflects the determination of black men to bring meaning to their new status as citizens by volunteering for military service. We see how civic obligation gets internalized in the military in this context. We also have the opportunity for African Americans to become officers, and I think this is another really important thing that we could perhaps discuss, just what it meant to be an officer, to be in a position of power over white men, to be able to issue a white man orders, and how that directly subverted kind of the most powerful racial hierarchy in the country. But at the same time, we see how military service kind of, functions in different capacities, serves multiple purposes. Military served as an opportunity for black men to escape a life of servitude, of racial oppression in the post-Civil War South, how it becomes a refuge in many respects. But we also see the military kind of as a site of deep contradiction as well. In the experience of the Buffalo Soldiers, how they're serving effectively as agents of American empire, spreading the white man's burden in terms of fighting wars against Native Americans, serving in the South Pacific, in the Philippines, serving in the Caribbean, right? How this was really reflective of the complexity of black identity in the late 19th and early 20th century, right? We're currently in the midst of the World War I centennial, and I think it's really important to recognize just how pivotal that war was to not just this country's history broadly, but to African American history. I can go on and on about World War I, so I will keep this very short and sweet. But I think we see very clearly these questions about what African Americans were fighting for. Some 380,000 African American soldiers, were they indeed fighting to make the world safer democracy, as Woodrow Wilson professed? Some certainly were. Were they fighting to make democracy a reality for black people in the United States? Absolutely. Some were most certainly doing that. And I think this is what makes, again, the black soldier such a potent symbol in this context for black civil rights activists as well as for white supremacists as well. But we see black soldiers also fighting for other reasons as well. And I think it's important to recognize the humanity of black soldiers, to not become so fixated on them as symbols in the larger fight for civil rights, as symbols of the contentious nature of race relations, but just what did fighting in the military mean for individual black men and women? It served as an opportunity to get away from home. It served as an opportunity to experience a world outside of the South. It also represented an opportunity to get a paycheck, right, to support one's family, to get an education, to get some semblance of basic health care services. It served as an opportunity for young African American men to become a man, kind of as a rite of passage of sorts. So we see the complexity of black identity really coming to fore in the context of the mass mobilization of African Americans during World War I. And this is seen on an even larger scale in World War II. As I spoke in the earlier quote from Charles Hamilton in Houston, African Americans applied the painful lessons of their experiences in World War I to the Second World War. So we can talk about the Double V campaign, the victory against fascism abroad, as well as the victory against racism at home, and reflecting a maturation of the black civil rights activism explicitly connected to military service, the seeds of which were planted during World War I. So the military quite literally becomes a battleground, a political battleground in the larger fight for African American civil rights, but for individual black soldiers, the military was also a battleground for their rights as citizens, for their rights as men, for their rights as human beings. And so again, we see how the experiences of black men and women as well. I think it's very important to recognize how during World War II, we see more and more African American women finding opportunities to serve in the military. I think a very important theme when we think about the constitution of the military today, how the complexities of black identity get manifested, articulated in the war experience. The breakdown of racial segregation in the military began at the end of World War II. And after the war, as Congress debated a new Selective Service Act, civil rights leaders, most notably A. Philip Randolph, actually threatened that African Americans would resist a future draft if the military remained Jim Crowed. So Truman's executive order on July 26, 1948, desegregating the military, was certainly a watershed moment, the culmination of decades of pressure from civil rights organizations who insisted that the right for African Americans to fight for the country should, in fact, be colorblind. So we see the military at this moment beginning to tout itself as a vanguard of racial change, kind of positioning itself ahead of American society more broadly in terms of the pace of desegregation, right? But this also masks a much darker, much harsher reality for many African American soldiers, especially in the context of the wars in Korea and the wars in Vietnam. And I'll let some of my fellow panelists talk more about this. But we see how while formal segregation is breaking down, a white supremacist military culture, a disregard for black life, the barriers for advancing through the officer ranks, those remain much more entrenched. And I think scholars have yet to fully grapple just with the deep traumas associated with both the wars in Korea and the Vietnam War in particular. But this obviously raises an interesting paradox. I mean, why were so many African Americans then volunteering to serve in the military? As the military becomes desegregated, more and more African Americans see the military as an opportunity, given the limited opportunities for African Americans in civilian life, in terms of employment, in terms of social services, in terms of realizing the full benefits of American citizenship. So African Americans in disproportionate numbers began to enlist in the military, and this continues as the Army, as the military shifts to an all-volunteer force in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. We can, I think, talk more about what this means in terms of more recent conflicts in the Persian Gulf War in 1991, and recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I think it's important to, again, keep in mind just what the right to fight has meant, how it has meant fighting on behalf of the nation, but it's also meant fighting on behalf of the race as well. And what has this meant for how black men and women kind of see themselves, from kind of the aspects of their personal lives, their personal identities, their own individual hopes and aspirations, how the military has served as a really important site for African Americans to stake claim to their full humanity, but also serves as an opportunity for us to think about just what this has meant kind of in the larger context of struggles for freedom and civil rights in this country's history. So I will.
Oh, that's awesome, man, to cover that much ground in that short a period of time. That's all right. So we have the foundation of what the right to fight is about. Vera will sort of take us to the image of it all and how it plays out, not only externally, but within the black community. We can do the PowerPoint now, or you can just give me the heads up and then we'll get that queued up for you.
You can put it up.
Okay, let's do that. We have some images and I'll let Vera go from there.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Everyone here at the Charles Hamilton Institute, speakers. Thank you. Chad, you gave this wonderful overview. It's such a rich and lengthy continuum. And what I'm going to try to do is just kind of go down deeply, kind of into a wormhole of some of the dynamics that we're operating on a daily basis for some of the soldiers, and what it means to fight. You can fight in multiple ways. I was delighted the image that you put up with the right to fight, because those soldiers, I'll just try to go quickly. I'll go back over these. Oh my goodness.
Can we turn the lights
That's
off?
not okay. All right. Maybe we can just hold up the poster. The poster. Thank you. We'll pass it around, actually. Yeah. I'll turn the image. This poster has this image of these 4 soldiers, what I call 4 soldiers reading. They're not all reading. Thank you. They're not all reading. They're actually what I call posing and performing an act. And just to have that next to the title, The Right to Fight, I thought was really interesting, because this is not a kind of military stance of in-your-face fighting. That image is really a wonderful moment of resistance and the multiple ways in which we try to change our circumstances through these small acts. I don't know, do you have the image I originally set to pull up? Okay. Anyway, it's the one on the poster. It's really what this small talk resonates over.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I left my spot. So, I want to share with you some of the panoramic group photographic portraits of United States servicemen, and then set them within a frame of the panoramic vision of the U.S. military during the Great War period, and how intimate an act of resistance the image I just spoke about is in this context. This image here is a well-known image of African-American soldiers returning home after World War II. They have received their Croix de Guerre, their awards from the French government, and they come home to, you know, incredible acts of violence, rejection, and general American despair around the idea of the black soldier, whereas they were very much celebrated in France. And this small group was part of a front that did participate with the French. They were actually fighting. A great majority of troops had been relegated to these auxiliary corps to clean and support the other troops and to dig the graves. So they knew this history and this opportunity that they had to fight, and it just really captured in this image of their kind of self-pride and in this moment that was going to be met with such resistance. The Great War and the post-World War I discourse on race was crafted and shaped by the development of what W.E.B. Du Bois called a white global consciousness. And while this new awareness of a racialized and globalized solidarity crafted around the concept of white supremacy emanated from the European nations in distinctive ways, it included, excluded, and then embraced the recently vanquished Germany in tangible ways. In general, I suggest in my work that strategies of race were employed as a weapon of subjection by American diplomatic and military agencies. And then subsequently, they helped Germany to reconcile itself as a white civilized nation, all based on this backbone of American Jim Crow policies of race. So what I'm suggesting is that as they exported American power into the world, they also they expanded and spread American strategies of race within Jim Crow. And they could not only apply it to other marginalized groups in the spaces that they came to, but they often applied it to white, you know, identified people in their wish to exert American power. So whether you were white or not definitely depended upon political goals and military clout, and it could be imposed and withdrawn in a way that it wouldn't necessarily be for African Americans. So that's one point of this.
Can you tell us the date of that, or the year of that photo?
This photograph is when they were returning home, just about at the end of 1918. I believe it's in the early months of 1919.
1919.
Of returning home after the war in Europe. Oops, wrong one. This is a poor photograph, but it comes a prelude to what I'm going to show you next, which is this idea of visually of mass bodies that were involved in this conflict of total war. Very often we're focused on our own story, and when you kind of zoom out, as I call it, look at the grand narrative, you can see how some of these strategies were effective. Chad mentioned the traveling of U.S. troops to the Philippines and to Cuba. But what's interesting to me is the development of technology around this time when you have this panoramic photograph that's really trying to capture the immensity of bodies under the power of the U.S. government. So this is a troops on board in 1919 arriving in Charleston, South Carolina. Here is an image of officers at camp. And I have a lot of these images. I'm working on them. They almost become dance choreography performances in themselves when you see their effort to maintain this order across these broad lengths and then to capture that digitally.
Where was that?
That was in the United States, just a capture of officers at Camp Grant. And here you have a U.S. military serviceman who is under camouflage capturing photographs, because this is really a part of their strategy is not only the movement of troops, but how to prove that they've moved these troops, what actually happened, and how they use it within their military strategies. Here are some of these other very powerful images of capturing the might of the U.S. bodies.
All what? All what?
Well, actually, if you could get up close, Woody, over here, you can see that there is an African American, and over here is another African American. The reason why I'm pointing that out, because that was actually before the mobilization of troops for World War I, when there was this kind of porosity where blacks could be with whites or not, but it was in the mobilization for, entering the Great War, that all of those racial conflicts came into being, and they're like, absolutely not, we're not going to have black troops sequestered with white troops, and all the dynamics that Chad spoke about, and it became rigid and solidified to this picture. Now this picture is also what I call in process, and if you look at this gulch over here, there's plenty of land over here where this picture could have been moved over. This gulch, actually, there are black soldiers in the back. And it's interesting to me that when they formed that, it takes hours to set the troops up and how they're going to be documented. That the front facade of white troops is here and the black troops are physically segregated within that group before it became publicly, viable to show that segregation. So these are what I call kind of in-process photographs, things that are showing that these decisions on how to enact them, they cannot happen overnight. And there are documents that are available to us to look at these processes and how they came about. I think I'm going
Is
to...
that top picture offices as well, or is that just something different?
Say again?
Is the top picture offices as well?
The top one is officers from Camp Grant. Yeah, and so, they were black officers. This is not an unusual thing to have black officers. Let me see what else I have here, and I don't want to go too long. This is a picture I wanted to show you of, again, the technology at work, where in order to create troop strategies, they actually made these photographs of the battles taking place and then blew them up, rushed them to headquarters, and then discussed what was happening on the battlefield. So just to say that the panoramic photograph served multiple purposes at that time. This, unfortunately, it didn't load up properly, is the one that's on the poster. And now I want to go back to, if you could look at that poster and see the act of reading, that they have the book open, the other two are casually standing by. It was in resistance to this moment. What was happening is after the violence stopped and the armistice was in place, they didn't know what to do with all of these soldiers before they could demobilize and send them home. And there was a great effort to advance literacy and knowledge and thinking about how these soldiers en masse were going to interact on the American landscape when they came home and while they were under occupation over in Europe. These campaigns to bring books and literacy to soldiers was a deeply embedded one. Lots of resources went into it, and the campaign was visually codified as white and Aryan, and it never touched on the African American soldier. It was another one of those services that were denied black troops even though they were serving. Some of the more obvious ones, you could point to how they controlled soldier behavior in the war and how they were fraternizing with women in Europe, and the dispense of prophylactics to control sexual behavior and the consequences of disease. Prophylactics were not distributed to black troops. It's part of the kind of discourse around rape and black soldiers that was disseminated around that time I go into in my other research. So I think I want to just close to say that the soldiers that you see on the poster, they are fighting, they're posing, they're in performance, and they're advocating for a new aesthetic order of things within this attack that came on multiple registers. And that sometimes the right to fight is limited, but these images may reveal how we do fight, and we do that in multiple ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vera. Yeah, images that come back to us are very powerful. I hadn't seen these photographs before, but those are very powerful given the time that they were taken, 1915, 1918, 1920. Ernie, on the other hand, And I can remember being a young man, every day on the Huntley Brinkley news show, there was always some report with pictures of the Vietnam War. That is the one, maybe the first one that was completely televised. There was no, like you see here now, embedded troops, cameramen, and all the guys that sort of made names for themselves, Dan, they were all on the front with the troops, and we know all these names, even as a boy, you know, the My Lai, we know Phnom Penh, we know Da Nang, we know the Tet, because we heard it every day when I was in the early 60s and 70s. So, and I know most people here have a relative, definitely in the military, but definitely somebody that was in the Vietnam War. That was the war for our generation. And you're starting to see more books about it now. We've sort of healed from it now, but at the time it was a very, very complicated war for us to talk about as a nation, and definitely within black folks to talk about how it really came before in terms of blacks and whites fighting together in some jungle. Ernie is one of them. It's always an honor for me to talk to Ernie. As an introduction, I want to show this interview that he did. Ernie's one of the first guys I met in Boston. He's been a good friend for the last 20 years. And I like being around military guys. I just do. They got a no-nonsense approach. So, Ernest, if you could pull this interview up. And you got to remember the time. This is the 60s. Half the nation didn't want to fight the fight. The other half of the nation was demanding their rights. Now, you went through World War I, where you said you were going to give us rights. You didn't do it. World War II, you said you were going to give us rights. You didn't do it. We fought in Korea. And now in Vietnam, people had M16s and they weren't taking it anymore. Right? So, Ernest, let's go on. I'm going to have to dim the lights too again. He's from Roxbury, Massachusetts.
My effort with the Marine Corps was successful. I was able to enlist, and the additional year, as opposed to 2 years in the draft, I figured would keep me out of the combat zone, but actually enlisting in the Marine Corps at that time, it hurried me towards the combat zone. I just didn't know it at the time. So original draft notice, and I joined the Marine Corps. And I joined on a buddy system with two of my closest friends. We were in the same unit until we got into Vietnam, and we were separated. So I stayed with 1-1 in the Da Nang area, and Sonny Davis, they both were my best friends, but he went up to 1-9. You know, he was up along the DMZ, and Lavelle stayed in Vietnam just for a minute, and then he was transferred back to the United States.
Well, so tell me a little bit about basic training for the Marine Corps.
12 weeks of football practice. That's what I call it. The benefits were the camaraderie and the teamwork. The physical piece I was kind of used to. And it certainly didn't prepare me for hostility. I was used to that too. It was a pretty rough neighborhood that my parents raised us in, my sister, myself. So we were kind of used to the physical aspects of surviving in that kind of environment. So boot camp was really an extension of that. And the beauty I got out of it was the men that I was working with. And it was particularly interesting at the time because 66, 65, 67, this country was going through upheaval in terms of civil rights. And it spilled over into the military. And the race piece just kept everybody on their toes. So a lot of people looked at that as a negative in boot camp, but it was certainly positive for me and for the two men that joined with me. It was positive. There was many whites in that situation that had never seen black men before, and they wanted to learn more about the interaction. And of course, boot camp forced the interaction, and it wasn't always unpleasant. So, and the Marine Corps has a way of training their folks to understand each other, because your life's going to depend on it, regardless of what color the person was. That was the beauty for me of serving in Vietnam that I can't replace today, was the person in front and behind and on the left and right give up their life for you in a heartbeat, regardless of the color. So, in my mind, they were part of the brothers, and that's what we referred to ourselves in Vietnam. And yeah, there was a little separatist to that. You know, we were separate, and it was our own way of being comfortable in Vietnam. So our hooches were black, but there were many white Marines that were welcome into those hooches, and because they understood that while they didn't have to go through the racial division piece, you know, we're all in the same boat together now. We're all going to the same place. Our enemies know who we are. They know of the upheaval, the differences between black and white, and they're going to take advantage of it, and they did. But it was interesting for me to be serving with men that wanted to draw the distinction. They wanted to have both races work together, because it was a common goal, regardless of where you came from. And I could appreciate somebody that came from a farming background, and they had particular skills. And my squad and the company were about 50-50. And we learned from each other. We learned the survival piece and to take care of each other. And that's carried with me over the years till now. And of course, the relationship with men that served with me.
Yeah. That's just a little snapshot. But Ernie?
Thanks, Howard. I've been sitting here and I've been kind of listening to all the comments. And by the way, thank you for this invitation. You know, I haven't really spoken on the subject for so long that it's become comfortable for me again. And thank you all for coming. But that's kind of like a capsule of my Vietnam experience, and I'll kind of precede that a bit, even though I spoke about it briefly. My family had a lot to do with it also. You know, my father served, and his father served, my uncles all served in segregated units. So they supported my Marine Corps experience. When I came home on leave, are you ready? How was the training? You know, is there any way we could help? I mean, I had a bunch of men around me that supported this effort, and that was important to me. And I think the piece tells a lot about the Vietnam experience, but the African-American Vietnam experience, again, I spoke about it briefly there, but it has stayed with me for the balance of my life until today. I've had a successful education, all because of the military. I've been a success in the business world because of the military, because of how I treat individuals. I kind of want them to sacrifice. And the business, my employees sacrifice for me. And they respect me just because of the military experience. And, you know, other things. You know, I did okay in the classroom also, but I try to keep fresh in their minds that the Vietnam experience was so full of racial contention, hatred. It wasn't all easy. The day I was wounded, I expected the brothers to come and get me and carry me back to the safe zone. They could not. But a white man did. Stood up, risked his life with just a handgun, picked me up, carried me to the chopper. I try to communicate with him today, and his family won't allow it. We don't want to bring back any of that, and you bring back all of that. It's the kind of experience that you want to teach, and I've been successful in trying to do that. And my therapist, one of my first ones, is sitting right in this audience right now, Mr. Ron Armstead, and I owe a lot to him because after I got back and I wanted to talk about the racial piece, I could talk to him about it. And we formed an organization to address the racial piece, which was the Veterans Benefits Clearinghouse Incorporated, that operated in Roxbury, Massachusetts for over 25 years, serving about 4,000 African American veterans every year. So, you know, the point I'm trying to make is you can make an experience negative or you can make the negative positive, and I've been real successful in doing that. And today's event even helps me even further because I don't have any shortage of energy on this subject. My mom used to always say, you know, the Lord must have been smiling on your stupid ass because I wasn't supposed to get out of that situation. And I did everything I could to come back home, and I don't take that back, you know, like there's no possible way I could take back the lives I took, and I don't regret it. You know, I did what I had to do, and everyone around me had the same job. And the beauty of it is those that survived and came back to the world, as we called it back then, we were able to distribute those skills in a positive fashion. For students, I've been a mentor to students through a number of organizations, and veterans have a large part of that. And so the piece that's still important to me is this kind of a forum where you can hear the exact experiences. And I know there'll be others coming, and you'll probably hear some more about Afghanistan and Iraq and those brothers and sisters, since those are the two wars that really bumped up the sacrifice of black women. But today, you know, I'm very happy to speak about it. But it took 25 years of readjustment counseling, which Ron helped me with, and the brothers of VBC, in order for me to even closely articulate the experience. And it's been a blessing also because, again, I have that power to proceed and work with gentlemen like with Howard Manley and all the rest of the brothers and sisters that I've worked with over the years to try to improve the quality of life of African American Vietnam veterans. And in closing, I measure the wars in terms of African American experiences by the Medal of Honor. And they were very rarely given out in World War I, World War II, and Korea, but I relished the 40 that were given to blacks and browns in Vietnam. And that's how I measured our performance. Others can say what they want about the actual sacrifice, but that's how I measure it. And again, that's what is the source of the power. My relationships with those individuals that supported me and what I can do for our young people in terms of educating them around war, the consequences, and the real contributions of African American veterans. Thanks.
Ernie in his classic style did mention the fact that he did earn a Purple Heart. And the thing that I found most interesting is that he went back to Vietnam on a trip. If you could just briefly talk about your trip back to Vietnam 20 years after the war.
About 1986, it was. I got an invitation from a friend of mine, Mike Barnacle, and WCVB at the time wanted to sponsor a trip that would take 3 veterans back to Vietnam to talk to our former enemies across the table. I thought about it for a number of months, and I wasn't going to do it because we all made a pact in Vietnam that once you got out, you didn't come back for anything. And I had mixed feelings about that because I know that World War I, excuse me, World War II veterans went back to their battlefields. Throughout their lives, they visited Normandy Beach and the like, Iwo Jima, Saipan, all of that. But my oldest daughter convinced me to go back with this group, and we did. And it was an incredible experience. To sit across the table from a brown man who gave me respect for doing what I did, even though he lost 4 million in that conflict, he respected me. And it took me right back to the battlefield, because there are many times I know I should have been shot, but I wasn't. And it didn't just happen to me. I mean, the signs were posted on the trees, you know, black man, why are you doing this? We don't really have a beef with you. And, you know, that rocked some of us because the African Americans from all over the country. But those of us from the inner city could kind of speak to what they were trying to communicate to us. And we passed that on. But the trip itself, which took about a week, spanned from Hanoi, and the Vietnamese people up in the northern part of the country had never seen many black men. I mean, Fred Cherry was a POW in Hanoi, but these were young people that met us, and their grandparents and parents were involved in Vietnam. So it was almost a point where I wasn't admitted into Hanoi because they swore up and down I was Cuban. And if it wasn't for the newspaper folks we were with and the TV folks, that I wouldn't have gotten into Hanoi. And the trips, again, spanned from Hanoi down to Ho Chi Minh City. So we stopped at Chu Lai, where I served, stopped at Da Nang, and then we finalized in Ho Chi Minh City. And it was the conversations to people in the countryside, the mothers of the individuals that were killed. We were able to talk to them. And all of them told me that they respected me. The other parties in the trip, and I was the only, well, the film crew had some blacks in it, but they didn't fare so well. And there's some members of the Vietnamese community that chose that time to express their outrage and what we had did to their countryside. And that's a key word. They didn't really care about the city. They only cared about their countryside. And we did a job on their countryside trying to find them and force them out. And they forgave me. And like I mentioned in this piece, they were well prepared for us. They knew what the black man has experienced in the United States. They tried to take advantage of it. Sometimes it worked, but most of the time it did not. And those days that I spent with them, sleeping in their hooches with their families, were all small now. The men are all gone. And that's the real devastation that we put on the Vietnamese people. It took all the men. So they're just kind of rebuilding their manhood now, for lack of a better term. But there was a sense of peace in just communicating with them. And again, that's kind of added to what I have in my backpack for the rest of my life, is how they felt about my effort. And they were willing to write about it. And they showed me how their young people received it. And, you know, except in a couple of bad times we had when we went out at night in Hanoi, it was a beautiful experience in terms of myself being a black man and talking to a brown man about an experience in which white folks sent us there to do them in. And we did do them in. And I feel that today when I'm down in the Fields Corner section of Dorchester, which is Vietnamese. And they don't know who I am, you know, but I know who they are. And they're the descendants of folks that, in that period of time, you know, we laid waste on their countryside. And I remember that now because I can relate it to my own community. And you only have to focus on the situation around black males, and the same waste is being laid on our communities. And I thought about that when you had the slide up from Charleston, South Carolina, because it goes right back to now. And there's some significant struggles around, not military, but around black males in South Carolina. So the trip is, you know, in addition to being my kind of crowning achievement in terms of my work with veterans, it's my statement because WCVB gave me the latitude to speak throughout the whole trip. And a piece that came out of it that won 7 Emmy Awards. So I'm real pleased about that and what it's done for the classes I give now for young people that want to understand the military experience. And I'm very proud of it. There was none of it that was really negative to me. The stuff that was negative, I made it positive in terms of my interaction with people, with veterans, with businessmen, with community leaders. It's all been positive. It was a preparation for me. The schools that allowed me to study on full scholarships when I came back, I'm blessed. But a lot of it came into real focus on that trip and going and spending the night in Hanoi and spending the night in Da Nang again after all those years. It invigorated me. And, you know, I certainly don't have any fear for saying what I need to say about the African-American experience in Vietnam. And I hope what I've done here has been helpful for you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ernie. Now we can fast forward to today. Oh, it's not on? Well, don't worry, I can check it. We can fast forward today. We don't see those same images that we saw on a daily basis in Vietnam. There's been wars going on in the Middle East for the last 15 years, 20 years, ever since the hostage situation under Jimmy Carter. There's always been some hot spot that we've had some involvement in, maybe just the air troops, maybe just air, maybe some ground troops, but we don't get the day-to-day images of reports. And some part of that is political. No politician wants to see coffins with the American flag on it, especially not around election time. But there's troops stationed there now, on the ready, doing the thing. And I don't think at this point, and Brother Ogletree can tell us, that race is the dividing factor within the service. But you can tell us your story. You've spent most of your professional career in the service. He's from Merced, and I'm not going to talk about your football preference, but go ahead.
I was supposed to mention Cowboys first. Oops, did I say Cowboys?
Here we go, see. Thank you, Dr. Ogletree.
Actually, I admitted to Howard earlier that I really used to be a Raider fan and Cowboys fan. But thanks to my older brother, unfortunately had to leave, I followed his footsteps and my now a lifetime Cowboy fan. And also I want to make sure I take this opportunity, as the rest of us did, to thank Howard for inviting me here. And I can say one thing, after sitting here listening to this information that I've heard thus far, all the history, all the obvious research is done, and of course the personal experience, I'm honored to be part of this group. I'm the youngster of the group because my time frame in the military didn't cover Vietnam, didn't cover obviously World War I and World War II. I spent part of the 70s, 80s, and 90s in the Air Force. I entered the Air Force in 1978 and retired in 1998. And Howard sent me some questions to kind of, paint the path of my general discussion, and obviously any responding to questions may come up from the group. So I'm going to use that as an outline to tell you a little bit about Richard Ogletree. I'm just a plain old country boy, just like my brother used to be before he blew up. And my sister-in-law Pam can attest to that, because I met Pam when Charles met her. They were still at Stanford, so she knows what I'm talking about. That we came from humble beginnings, and he's not here for me to say this to him, but I am quite proud of my brother. And I had the opportunity to have him come and speak during Black History Month back in 2010 at my job, which I'm not going to talk about, Howard.
I'm not going to talk about that.
And with that having said, let me put this in right now. I am a current employee of one of the 3-letter DoD agencies in DC. I'm here because I'm a veteran. So I'm not going to talk about my job, Howard. Okay, so don't ask me. I'll make a couple of references to being in the intel world, because some of the things that happened to me as far as dealing with any racism I did deal with my 20 years in the Air Force obviously happened while I was in the intel community. And as I will allude to in a minute here, there weren't a whole lot of blacks in the intel community when I was involved in it. Back in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, obviously there's a lot more now. But as I said, I joined the Air Force in 1978, retired in 1998. And why did I join the Air Force? I joined the Air Force because I lived in Merced, California. There wasn't a whole lot going on there. And obviously, we were sometimes subjected to some racism there. And I think because I was somewhat naive when I joined the Air Force, some of the things that I was exposed to as far as racism, I didn't recognize as racism at the time. One of them I'll allude to when I was actually submitted for a special program in the Air Force, and this little thing that happened that I didn't think about until I was looking at Howard's question, made me think, maybe that was actually something to do with racism, the fact that little mistake happened. But anyway, I'm going to use this as an outline. And one of the things that Howard asked was, why did I stay till retirement? Because I had come from Merced, California, and I knew what was happening in Merced, California. And actually, to be totally honest, after I went to basic training, I went back home to Merced, and I went to, of course, visit all my friends. I found out that the last place that I worked at, a place called Mary Kay Mills, had actually went out of business about 6 months after I joined the Air Force. And the reason I joined the Air Force, I graduated in '75, went to Merced Community College for about a year and a half, used my 2 years of community college eligibility to play football, and decided I need to get out of Merced. And it was quite ironic, the fact I joined the Air Force, because there was an Air Force base, Castle Air Force Base, 7 miles from where we lived. And all of us, and it was in a town called Atwater. Merced High and Atwater High were big-time rivals. So of course, we disliked all the airmen from the base. And the reason for that is because they could come to Merced, get our women and take them out to the club, and we can get on base to go to the club, and our women were hanging out with the airmen. So when I joined the Air Force, a lot of people were shocked that I joined the Air Force, because I talked badly, like most people in Merced, about the Air Force folks. One of the things that was mentioned, I believe Ernie mentioned it, about the fact that some of the success was because of your military experience. And one of the phrases that my brother uses quite often, if you ever hear him speak, especially when he's acknowledging his gratitude for many times he's been recognized for the things he's done over the years. A phrase he uses quite often is the fact that he stands on the shoulders of others. Talking about Higginbotham, Marshall, et cetera, all those folks. And I must say that the fact that I was able to go into Lackland Air Force Base in basic training in February 1978 to be in the same barracks with other blacks, whites, Latinos, et cetera, is because of the fact that some of the things that happened during Vietnam, World War I, World War II, et cetera, some of the things they went through, some things that Tuskegee Airmen went through, the things they went through, that allowed me to be able to do that. So again, I'm going to steal the phrase from my brother. I stood stand on the shoulders of others because of the fact that they went through a lot of things I didn't have to deal with. And as I said, when I was thinking about what I was going to say here today, I thought about some of the things that happened to me over my Air Force career that maybe was racism involved, maybe not. But again, I don't know. But a lot of it changed because of what people that went before me went through and experienced. One of the things that I did, Howard asked about, did I do anything out of patriotism? I was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, and I was informed that either myself or choosing from a group of 3 other E-7s was going to be sent to Saudi Arabia for 45 days to fulfill the TDY, temporary duty for an individual who had to come back to the States on emergency leave. And I didn't want to go. I told my wife, she said, no, I don't want you to go over there, because she had heard about people getting beheaded and crazy stuff like that. I said, well, it's just 45 days. She said, no, I don't want to go. But I was out jogging one day, and I was just thinking about it, because about 5 or 6 years earlier when I was in Berlin, I was told something similar, that because of the job I was working, there was somebody who needed to go to Saudi Arabia for 6 months, and that my name was thrown in the hat. I wasn't selected for that. But while I was out jogging, I was thinking, well, I didn't get selected last time, so maybe I should do this. And also part of the reason was I knew one of the other individuals was possibly going to be selected, a guy I knew who was a single parent. And I said, okay, it's 45 days, I can do this. And that was out of patriotism, because I felt that I needed to do it because it was the right thing to do. And I wanted to be able to look back someday like today and say, hey, I actually did that without being forced to go. Now, the racism as far as me in the military, I thought about 2 specific situations where I was a victim of racism. There's a program the Air Force used to have called below the zone promotion, where you could get promoted from E3 to E4 up to 18, 24 months early. But in order to do it, you had to be recommended by your supervisor, go before a number of boards, and then finally get to the level where you could actually get a promotion. Well, when I was in Berlin, I was nominated by my supervisor, I was E3, and I made the first board. They ask you questions about Air Force history, customs courtesies, check your uniform to see how sharp you dress, make sure your name tag's on the correct side, that type of stuff. I made it to the next level, and I went to the base board. There were three different organizations on the base, all submitted individuals. I was selected, I made that board. And there were 5 of us from Berlin that had to go out to Rhein-Main Air Base out in what you should call West Germany. Young folks may have no idea what West Germany is, or East Berlin or West Berlin. But there were 5 of us that went. And we had to go before a board at that level. And we went before the boards that morning, and we were heading back. We're back and changed because we had to take an overnight train back to Berlin. We would find out the results later. Again, there were 5 of us. I was the only African-American of those 5 from Berlin that went. So we said, let's go over to the Ernest Club and have a couple of beers, and then we'll go back, catch the train, and head back. Well, back in those days, a popular drink among the military folks in Germany was a liqueur called Afro-Corn. One of the individuals, I remember whether it was me or one of the others, had a bottle of Afro-Corn and we were drinking, walking on the way to the club. And we were passing around, kind of like you see in some of the movies, guys with brown paper bag passing a bottle around, everybody just sipping out of the bottle. We had been sipping, walking in the club, and I took a sip, handed one of the guys, and out of the blue he said, N-word lips. He didn't say N-word, he used the actual word. And I thought, did he say what I think he just said? And of course, one of the other guys, again, keep in mind, there were 5 of us, I was only African American, the other 4 were white. The other guys kind of played it off, and he said something, and he kind of laughed. And in a split second, I wanted to choke him, bust him over the head with the bottle, or just ignore it. So I was thinking back, I just kind of froze and said, I'm just gonna let it go. But it made me think, if he said that, and we, again, keep in mind, we were going to the club, not coming from the club, so it's not like he was drunk and said it. So he said that, and made me think. Now, this guy I'd known for a couple of years. We played intramural softball, basketball, volleyball together, we worked together. And it's the first time I ever said anything like that. So it made me wonder, what did he really think about me? How often did he say things like that when I wasn't around? Well, there was another incident. Again in Berlin, a couple of years later. By the way, I had 2 tours of Berlin. I was there for a total of 9.5 years. It was a great job.
We're getting a lot of good information about his
job.
The group of folks I work with, we're shift workers. There was 4 rotating shifts working, the night shift, day shift, and the swing shift. And during our 3 days off, we'd often go on breaks, trips together over break. And once we went on a trip to the Harz Mountains, it's like a 3.5 hour drive from Berlin. And some folks were trying to ski and ice skate. And then, of course, we were, as young people did back in the day, doing a lot of drinking. So we're sitting around drinking and telling jokes, and another guy, different guy, was telling a joke. My wife and I were the only 2 African Americans part of this group. There were probably told like 25 of us that went. And we were sitting around, and again, he was telling a joke, and the N-word slipped out. And this time the guy had been drinking, and we actually got in a fight. And luckily, nothing happened as far as disciplinary reaction. But again, that was an incident where something came out and made me think, how often does that actually happen? Where something slips out like that. Now, the third incident that may or may not have been, racism, I was E6 at the time, and there was a program, I don't know if the Air Force still has it or not, it's called a STEP program. It's an acronym for Stripes to Exceptional Performers. Now, we all know Stripes has an E on it, correct? If you chop the E, it's strips, correct? S-T-R-I-P-E-S. When my package was submitted, again, I thought it was great. Somebody thought enough of me to submit this package. And it had to go before a number of levels and all the way back to the Air Force command headquarters for the promotion. And one of the guys who did admin for our organization told me, hey, Tree, I guess heard you got nominated for the STEP program. I said, oh, cool. He said, but guess what? And he thought it was a joke. He looked at it, the package, and on the front it said, strips. And I was thinking, I thought back to when I was informed that I had been selected for this, or nominated for this, that there was an Air Force captain, white captain, who said, hey, Tree, I need you to give me some information because you got nominated for the STEP program. I said, okay. And I said, did you notice that it says strips there, not stripes? And he said, it's no big deal. And I was thinking, this is something that's impacting my career, could potentially promote me up to the next grade, yet they didn't think enough of it to make sure it was done properly. So it made me think, well, maybe somebody said, to make sure it looks like everything's above board, we need to nominate somebody that's black. I don't know, I'm just saying maybe that was it. Again, these questions made me think back about stuff that happened. So maybe that's some racism where they thought, well, we gotta nominate somebody, let's not put a lot of effort into it, let's just go through the steps. I don't know. The other 2 incidents were clear cut, where that guy actually said something. This is just something that made me think about, was that what happened? I don't know. Now, as far as my overall career, I have a lot of things that I can do today, again, having this job with DOD, because of what I experienced in the Air Force. The Air Force did a lot of things for me. It got me out of MSgt. My first son, oldest son, doesn't have a birth certificate. He has a certificate of live birth abroad from the U.S. consulate in Berlin. He's the only kid on his block that can say he has one of those. When we were over in Berlin for the 2 tours, based on my employment with the Air Force, we went to see a lot of places. We went to a factory in Sweden and bought a brand new Volvo. Got a tour of the factory. Took my 2 kids to Legoland. A lot of things the Air Force did for me that are great. And it allowed me to, because of the experience I received in the Air Force, allowed me to be able to do what I can do today because of the fact that maybe some things happened to me that I overcame. Maybe I didn't have it. Obviously, I didn't have as much problem as back in the day, Vietnam, World War II, World War I, etc. But there were some things I did have to deal with as an Air Force veteran. I know there's some other things I wanted to cover. I want to make sure we have time for questions. A big thing here, talked about rising folks like Colin Powell. When I was a young airman, if we ever saw an Air Force Master Sergeant, Senior Master Sergeant, or Chief Master Sergeant who was African American, or an Air Force full-bird colonel with the Eagles, that was a big deal to us. Because again, there weren't a whole lot of them around. And as far as me being in my career field intel, I play a lot of sports. Both tours of Berlin, my 2 tours of San Antonio, Texas, San Angelo, Texas. On our intramural sports teams, most of the top teams that won base championships were the teams that had the guys from the motor pool, worked at a dining facility, maybe at the clinic, or something like that. And I was, as far as playing on the intramural team with the intel guys, we never won anything. We never won anything at all. But the other guys, when I go to the gym, play basketball, mostly African Americans there, and not all are African Americans, but they used to joke at me sometimes, say, hey, Tree, why are you playing on a sorry team? You guys don't have any jocks on your team. Well, that's the people that I work with, those people that I play sports with. So dealing with that, it was strange. And also when I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas, to be an instructor I was a Russian linguist and intelligence analyst. I was instructor for Russian linguists. When I went to Goodfellow, I had to submit a package with a full body photo, in the Class A uniform, and I'm sure the certain people had to look at that package and had to prove it. Now, maybe if there had been some overt racism, maybe somebody would have disapproved my package, I wouldn't even know. But I did get selected to go and become an instructor. I was the only Russian instructor. There were very few instructors, period. And I was really impressed when I went through the 5-week instructor school that there were 2 instructors on the staff to train instructors that were African American. So there were some things I was able to do despite some of the racism that we dealt with. But I think, again, based on what I did over my 20 years in the Air Force, I don't look back on it. One of the questions that you asked, would I do it again? Would I recommend the military? Absolutely, I recommend the military. Obviously, the benefits have changed, the pay's changed, a lot of things have changed. But I wouldn't be here today sitting in this panel if I hadn't been in the military. I wouldn't be able to do some of the things I've been able to do for my 2 sons and my wife if I hadn't been in the military. And again, I stand on the shoulders of those that came before me as far as dealing with the things that the Tuskegee Airmen had to deal with, those in Vietnam, those in World War I, World War II, because there are some things that I've read about, obviously things you may have experienced that I don't know how I would have reacted. There's one thing with somebody the drink and the N-word slips out, that's one thing. But some of the things that I read about, that some of the people went through back in the day, I don't know how I would react to that. But again, I don't want to take any more time, but that's the younger Tree in a nutshell.
All right, thank you. So we got 2 tours in Germany, Russian linguist. Okay.
Leave it alone.
We're going to piece it all together. All right, I don't quite know what time it is. Okay, so let's throw it up for any questions, comments. I'll come over with the mic. Thank you, each of the panelists.
The mic is on because we need to
Okay.
make sure it's on, please.
Well, I'm not quite sure how to turn it off, so you might.
It's on, sir.
Even on the side, on the bottom.
Thank you, sir. Don't be all shy now. Who wants to start off and ask this distinguished
Question. I have 2 relatives in the military. My grandfather served in the military, my great uncle served in the military, Army. My brother-in-law served in the Marines, so he is hoorah. And I did Air Force ROTC, so I loved it. I did it at Tuskegee, and I loved it. But one of the issues, let me stand up. One of the issues I know that my brother-in-law speaks of, because he's a staff sergeant in the reserves, he couldn't give up military. He just loves it. He went from the Marines and then jumped into the Army. I was like, how'd you do that? But there are some questions, some issues that they deal with promotion still, their units, and still dealing with racial issues. Some blame game things going on. Well, this was that unit, this is these guys. And to an extent that I've heard him talk to me about it, because I was in ROTC, so I guess he figures, I can talk to my sister-in-law somewhat. But understanding that with the unit that he's in and the different men and women that he works with now, and some of the higher-ups that they are dealing with and they report to, the issue of promotion, the issue of benefits still plays a role as far as racism goes. And there are some gentlemen, some soldiers who decided, before their 20 years comes around, or before the board says, we'll let you do your 20 years, or you actually end up going, they decide, this is it for me. I just don't want to deal with it anymore. I don't want to deal with the issues. I don't want to tolerate it on top of, other things that are going on. So my question to you is how have you come across, here in Massachusetts, because he lives in Pennsylvania, have you come across that
with young men and women here in Massachusetts, and what is it, and this will go to you as well as to you, sir, how do you deal with that? How do you relate to them on that issue, whether they're retired or whether they're reserves and they want to come to you and ask you questions regarding how to deal with these issues that are still going on?
Thank you.
Are you speaking specifically to your family member or members of people that you know?
All. It would be all.
They're in the military?
Military, yes. Army.
I'm only going to tell you from the gut that if their superiors haven't experienced what many had in Vietnam or in other wars, then the way they look at their subordinates may be a little different. I suffered from a little bit of that myself, and looking at people that had no military experience at all, and judging them, and thinking that they had nothing to offer my organization, and they really do. But my goal was to create a mix of individuals that could work with each other, which is the same thing I had to do in Vietnam. Only it was pretty black and white. You know, the whites didn't, there's some situations where, you know, it was really violent, but they just didn't want to work with us. And they told their commanding officers, I'm not going to work with them. And either you're going to stay alive or not. And, you know, you end up working with each other, is what I'm trying to say. And I think in that situation, you know, there has to be much more communication. You know, if you're asking me, do I experience that here? No. Where promotions are held back because of how a person may feel about their subordinates, as opposed to giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're around me and I can share some experiences with them and hopefully better prepare them to move up. And that's the positive side of it, because it sounds like the negative side is happening with it. They're not getting any recognition, even though they may be worthy. So that would be my only comment, that no, I don't experience that here. But, you know, I'm in a kind of laboratory setting, you know, and the folks that I deal with have allowed me to do what I wanted to do. So that's a little atypical, but I would say that I don't think there's anything wrong with them requesting mast. At least that's what they call it in the Marine Corps. And that forces a conversation. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for being on the panel. And it occurred to me as I'm seeing you and listening to the presentation that I'm not sure I've ever been to a presentation where we had an opportunity to direct questions to a panel about blacks in the military. So I've had a question for decades, and I'm going to ask for you now, because I think all of us have heard the story. I mean, I remember in the conversation talking with people about wanting to go into the practice of law, wanting to go into politics. People said, oh, you're crazy, and do you have any idea what you're going to deal with? I don't think that there is any other profession where the consequences are as direct and absolute as in the military. So and I'm talking about in the context of what we, you know, being in a profession where you know that there's going to be racism and that there's a history. I always wanted to know, and I'm saying from the academics as well as those of you who serve, kind of to dig deep and get in the head. How do you get there? Knowing that you're coming from a country that doesn't really treat you well, not then and not so much even now. My experience with the Veterans Benefit Clearinghouse and working with Ernest told me that, and I think everybody knows even to this day, 67% of returning veterans are homeless, and for blacks that number is higher. So it's never been, the country's never been friendly to veterans, and the consequences, on any given day is death. But yet, since the opportunity began, so many black soldiers or blacks ran to the military. And I heard what you said. For some it was, I just wanted to get out of wherever I was. Some of it was patriotism. And I just always wanted to know, even in your study, if you have where does it come from? Like, how, is there something special about black people that we want to go and defend a country that doesn't offend us and risk death? I mean, I had a cousin, and I grew up in Springfield, first cousin, who served in Vietnam. And before anybody ever knew what PTSD did, all we knew was when he came home, he was different. And so one day in the early 80s, actually I had been in Boston for all of 3 years because I left there in 78. He left the house one morning and walked into the Connecticut River. And they found his body 3 weeks later, you know, but it was about that war. Something happened to him. And we, you know how we used to say, oh, he just touched. We never quite dealt with it, but it destroyed him. And yet they keep going. And it's not just about the draft. I mean, there's just so many of us. I just want to know where it comes from.
Where did you found, Chad?
Wow, there's a lot to that question. You know, I mean, listening to that story, in some ways, I experience a kind of a frustration as a historian to try and get at that question, because it's deeper than just the archive, right? I mean, it's deeper than just the written records. I mean, there's something, I think, very almost existential about asking that question and trying to get at an answer. One of my favorite books is Toni Morrison's Sula, and she has this fascinating character of Shadrach, who's a Afro-American veteran from World War I, you know, who's touched kind of in that way, but has a special gift as well. So I think it speaks to how there is something about that experience that is very powerful, that kind of gets at a core experience in the Black experience in this country, of trying to grapple with our place in the country, who we are as a people, where we want to go. But I think it also speaks to the deep humanity, as I kind of alluded to in my earlier remarks, that we have to acknowledge as well. That, you know, we're talking about men and women, you know, who are searching for opportunity, you know, for looking for ways to make their status as American citizens meaningful, by joining the military, by you know, looking for opportunity as far as getting away from home, you know, trying to have a career, a livelihood, support one's families, to get a little bit of education. You know, these are all kind of deeply human things, aspirations that I think Black soldiers in many ways, you know, encapsulate, you know, throughout the long historical experience of African-Americans in the military.
And I want to piggyback on that to some perspective. I joked about wanting to get away from Merced, but there's two things I was actually thinking about, from and to. Some people talking about joining the military because they're running from something, whether they maybe had gang issues or problems or whatever, or going to opportunities, as you said. There were opportunities that opened up for me because of the fact I joined the military. When I joined the Air Force, I took a bus from Merced to Fresno, California, and flew from Fresno to LA. 21 years old, first time on an airplane. I flew from LA to San Antonio for basic training. First time leaving the state of California. That was just the start of me as far as opportunities. You know, like I talk about my wife and kids being able to experience some things over in Europe, and we're stationed in Germany, but also for some of the people I met. You know, I met some great people from different parts of the world that joined the military. And I had some experiences with some local nationals when I was in Germany, you know, dealing with a German landlord. That was a great experience, especially when he invited us over and made us a cake out of some homemade nuts or something, and couldn't speak any English at all. But we had a great opportunity dealing with local nationals. So it was opportunities, as Chad said, opportunities some people look forward to getting to, opening up to, as well as maybe running away from something. When I joined the Air Force, I took the various tests. The ASVAB, Air Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, tell you what jobs you qualified for. Because of my scores, they said you can take this thing called the DLAB, the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, see if you can work as a linguist. Now, again, old country boy from Merced, I had no idea what a Russian linguist was. I knew nothing about Berlin, Germany, East Berlin, West Berlin, etc. But because of the fact that I took the opportunity to go join the military, it opened up a vast world for me and my family. And there's a lot of things that I can say I did today in places I saw. I mean, I have a piece of the Berlin Wall. Yes, there was a wall in Berlin. I have a piece of Berlin Wall on my desk that I personally busted down from a slab when the wall came down in '89. You know, so opportunities going to, as well as maybe problems running away from, to join the military.
I came in a little late, so I may have missed any commentary about the role of African Americans in World War II relative to the modern civil rights movement. Was that discussed at all? And if it wasn't, okay.
We scanned all our territory.
Okay, no, it's just such a powerful, powerful role that those men and women played to this country, and we overlook it. We're sometimes ignorant of it, but the leaders, Reverend Hosea Williams, Medgar Evers, our own Senator Brooke, these people were leaders coming out of World War II and set the dynamic for change. And in doing that, interestingly, Diane asked the question of why do they do that? I had the opportunity to interview over 300 World War II veterans in making the film, The Invisible Soldiers, for PBS, and almost all of them said they served because they wanted to make it better for somebody else. That was the bottom line for that generation. And that's an incredible, incredible legacy and statue. And so whenever I'm around people talking about military and veterans, I gotta hold up that generation. They're greater than the quote, great generation, because they had to run the 400-meter dash with boots on and a backpack. So I had to make that comment. And if you were interested in seeing that film, I have a lot of copies here. This occasion.
Okay, I'll announce that then.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the panel for your comments today. I'm hoping the panel and the audience will allow me to be a little flagrant today in terms of speaking about Chad Williams' book. The Torchbearers.
She's not my paid agent.
I am not on his payroll. However, a family member sent me a page from his book because it mentioned my grandfather, Ambrose Benjamin Nutt, who was a student here at Harvard Law School. And Chad acknowledged that. And I did some investigating and found out that as a student here at Harvard Law, he was commissioned as an officer and sent to Fort something in Iowa.
Fort Des Moines.
Des Moines, Iowa. I read Chad's book and went to meet him, and he gave me information about my grandfather, who died at the age of 37 after founding the Urban League in Milwaukee. So when you ask about why do they go fight, why did Ambrose Benjamin leave Harvard to go as a commissioned officer? He, as a black man from Jonesboro, Georgia, graduate of Class 2 at Morehouse, he wanted to prove that he was a black man of honor, that he too was equal to his white father, that he deserved recognition. He came home from this war, died before he was 37 of TB. And in Chad's book, Chad tells the story of these black men who were commissioned officers and sent to Des Moines, Iowa. While they were there being trained to go to Europe, Chad tells us that there was a black general, from West Point who was going to go to Des Moines to speak with these young black men who were on their way to Europe. But the president or somebody from the armed services said that this black general had to have a health examination before he could speak to these black men. And as a result of the examination, he was found to be unhealthy.
So this is Colonel Charles Young. He was a graduate of West Point. There were, I think at the time, only 4 or 5 African Americans who had graduated from West Point Military Academy. He was the most senior African American officer in the military at the time. Was legendary. I mean, he was Black America's war hero. Served extensively in the Buffalo Soldier regiments in the West, in Mexico. He was in line to be a general during the war, and went to Presidio medical base in San Francisco for what he thought was a routine medical examination. He was diagnosed with high blood pressure, kidney disease, and was forced into retirement. And this was right on the cusp of him earning a promotion to be general to command African American troops in Europe. Really one of the most tragic stories of the war. Woodrow Wilson actually received complaints from white officers who were opposed to serving underneath Charles Young. So there was a fair amount of duplicity involved as far as the military, all the way up to the White House, making sure that Charles Young did not become a general and serve in the war. Ironically, when the war came to an end, he was reinstated into active duty and served in Liberia. So the military thought he was too sick to serve in Europe, but well enough to serve in Liberia, and he died in 1922. So that type of story, it kind of breaks your heart, and again, asks you, why do African Americans continue to do this? But Charles Young had a remarkable sense of duty, and he committed his life, his career to serving his country and also serving his race. And I think that shared sense of duty and commitment is emblematic of the experiences of a lot of African American soldiers and officers in particular.
And Colonel Young, I'll just add this as a note. When all those reports came out that he was unhealthy and unfit to train, now I don't know if you all have driven from Boston to Ohio. He rode a horse.
Yep.
He said, what? I'm unfit? He got his horse and rode his horse from Ohio to Washington to prove that he was physically able. 1918. Colonel Young was a good friend of W.B. Du Bois. He was the guy. He taught at Wilberforce. He was the man. He was Colin Powell before there was Colin Powell.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I do a lot of work with members of Congress, and I just wanted to tap on, there is a petition that was signed by Barbara Lee to posthumously promote Charles Young to Brigadier General that's still in Congress. In terms of World War I, Senator Chuck Schumer from New York has introduced new evidence and got the Department of Defense to sign off, the U.S. Department of Army to give Henry Johnson from the 369th the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously, and I was just with his granddaughter and his great-grandson who fought in the first Battle of Fallujah and is having some issues right now. And Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson is recirculating the petition to upgrade Dory Miller's Navy Cross because of research done by a gentleman by the name of Ron Tarburton. We now have the action reports from Pearl Harbor to introduce as new evidence to the Department of the Navy for the upgrading of this medal. Now I say this because the struggle goes on. You focused on what's happening in the military. But this new wave with women, I don't know about you, but I'm getting my tail kicked by sisters talking about being sexually assaulted overseas. And this didn't just happen yesterday. It's fairly well documented. This is a major problem. I hear all the time on the news, 22 soldiers a day commit suicide. All right? Now, whether or not they've been deployed before, during, or after, it's a problem. It's a problem. And we have, as it was mentioned earlier, we have a significant homeless population of people from Vietnam that served. And it's interesting that one of my colleagues says, you know, he wonders why the people that serve are worse off than the people that didn't. Since we have such a reverence, is that the word? Reverence for military service, and we're in what I call the super patriot era. All right? But the people that are doing the worst are the people that have served, and we know that only 1% of the U.S. population, 350 million people, have ever seen a day in the military. So it's not the common equation that we're pushing for military service as some sort of venue for social justice, all right, or fair play, or civil rights, all right? I hear the same issues. We're not working. No one mentioned economic constriction as a reason why people join the service, because we're not working. It is an opportunity structure that some people go through and make good of. That's true. That's true. We can't deny that, right? And we can't deny that some people are, you know, come from patriotic families. I'm impressed with Henry Johnson's family. Henry Johnson served in World War I in 369. His son, Herman Johnson, was a Tuskegee Airman, and his grandson fights in the First Battle of Fallujah. So the military runs in their family. The military runs in their family. So we have that patriotic dimension, but it's much more complicated.
I appreciate that. Hold on, I'll get to you, and I want to talk to you.
Thank you. I want to thank the panel. And I wanted to respond to the question. This young woman was very graciously showed me how to get over here. I am the daughter of a lifer. My father was in the service for over 30 years. And before I came, because he's featured in the film African-Americans in World War II, I re-looked at that. And one of the things that struck me was the one man, they asked me why I do this. He said, because I was born here. This is my country, and that is why I serve. Now, in terms of some of the issues with people who get out, I can tell you, for example, with my father, one of the problems he had and why he went back in was because he couldn't adjust to life outside of the military. Some people really need that regimentation. And when you don't have it, your whole life can fall apart on you. So.
All right, I appreciate it. Let's end with Chuck Walker here, whose father, and he'll tell you. Go ahead.
Well, actually I wasn't, but I will. And to your sister here, one of the greatest, best kept secrets is being a military brat. You see the world, it's just an incredible thing. My father served in from 44, he was a class of 44B. He was in the 477th Bombardment Unit. And I want to thank the panel. And Howard, you're a phenomenal moderator. The question I have is really directed to the historian. I want some comment, actually all three of you can comment, all four of you can comment on the role of the presidents and how they served, which presidents served the military better. And I'm not talking about just in a budget standpoint, But I know that Bill Clinton restored history by posthumously giving a lot of awards to for military that were overlooked, particularly the Tuskegee Airmen. And just as an aside, you know, I hope that in your book you have a chapter on Bill Coleman, who went to law school here.
Colson.
Who, right, Zach?
Colson, William Colson.
No. Oh no, William Coleman. William T. Coleman, who went to law school here, was in Elliot Richardson's class, and after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, they left their law school to join the military. And Bill Coleman...
Oh, he served in World War II?
Yeah, we're talking about World War II. Oh. This is only World War I?
This World War I.
So this is a...
That's the next part.
Okay, I apologize profusely. But it's a really nice story, and you go ahead and I would encourage everyone to look into it, but he eventually became the Secretary of Transportation under Reagan.
Oh, his son is the dean at the school.
His son is the dean of psychology at BU, right? That's right. That's exactly right. And, but it's a wonderful story how the 477th, they called it the mutiny at Selfridge Field. And when they refused to sign this order during to sleep in separated barracks, and Thurgood Marshall was touring the country, taking on so many cases, and Bill Coleman was in his first year. He represented these 101 airmen who were court-martialed. So anyway, I wasn't going to go there. I really wanted to, and he won, 99 of them. So the question is, we're acquitted. Please comment on the presidents during those particular generations, and I would stand up and give you a standing ovation 24 hours a day, because you guys, everyone means so much to us.
All right, we'll do the roundup real quick. We'll just end with that, with 30-second closing remarks and something about a president. There's a question.
Well, I studied World War I, and Woodrow Wilson was president. To say he was not a fan of the Negro. I'll put it that way. He screamed "Birth of a Nation" in the White House. That's all you need to know.
I'd have to agree with what you said about what President Clinton did for the Tuskegee Airmen recognition. Because that's something a lot of people didn't know a lot about, but we put them back on the map.
A ditto on President Woodrow Wilson. I would throw out in an interesting way Truman, because the integration of the armed forces is a really understudied area. What exactly happened in Korea when those proclamations went through? It's something I'm looking at really very interesting.
I would say the most impressive to me, without going through a whole lot of research, is our current president, and how he and his wife, or the First Lady, have embraced the families of military and their plight. And I'm glad he's dragging his feet on boots on the ground.
Thank you.
Because my favorite saying about that is, they're gonna be black and brown.
All right, let me just give you one Dory Miller anecdote, and then we can all call it a day. Dory Miller, you mentioned him, was going to get a bump up in a promotion. Dory Miller, in case people don't know, he was in Pearl Harbor. He was on a ship, and it was under attack by, 400 Japanese fighters, right? And so he's down, he's in the mess hall because he couldn't get a job, above the deck. He's back there cooking, and he's hearing all this commotion, and he sees his commanding officer shot dead, and all kinds of blood and mayhem all over the place. And he finally gets up to the deck of the ship, and he finds one of those big old guns, right? And he starts blazing away, you know what I mean? It took him a minute. And so the legend is that he shot one of them down. I don't know if it's true or not, but he certainly was on that gun. And so the reporters came up to him afterwards and said, "So, hey, how'd you do it? How?" He said, "Well, it wasn't bad. Just as soon as I figured out where the trigger was, I did just fine." So, thank you for showing up today. Thank you.